highlights of day 3 from the DNC is Dr. Nathaniel Swigger from OSU Newark. Always good to have you here with us and get your insight on this. One of the other big speakers we heard from last night, the nation was officially introduced to the vice presidential candidate, Tim Kaine. How do you think he did last night?
I think he had a good night. You know, Twitter is already abuzz with all of the goofy dad jokes in relationship to Tim Kaine, so he's got a nice established persona, and he plays that very well. I'm not sure how much he ends up helping Hillary Clinton in the general election, but at a bare minimum, this is not a candidate who's going to hurt her. He's not going to be an embarrassment.
So as far as because they were saying that when you compare him to people, orators like Vice President Biden or the president,
right,
he's not really known for those sort of things. How does he fit in?
It's a very different tone, right? With Biden and President Obama last night, you saw this very statesman-like, for lack of a better word,
sure,
this kind of far-reaching rhetoric, whereas Tim Kaine was much more grounded. And I think in some ways that actually will play nicely off of Hillary Clinton, who, let's face it, has a tendency to be a little bit of a policy wonk. She can get a little bit detailed in her speeches, and having somebody who's a little bit more casual, I think will look good next to her.
Speaking of Mrs. Clinton, last night you have the president, who obviously they had their differences back in 2008 when they were hashing that out in the Democratic primaries, and she then kind of played the role of Bernie Sanders with the nomination then. All that certainly seemed to be behind them last night. How much do you think the president's endorsement will help her, if at all?
I think there are a couple of things about the president's speech that stood out to me. The first is that, and this is a weird thing to say for a general election speech, it was almost some partisan speech in a lot of ways. His attacks on Donald Trump, those weren't attacks on Republicans, those weren't attacks on conservatives. In fact, he specifically called out Trump for not being very Republican or conservative. And if he can sort of pitch that as Hillary Clinton as the more traditional American choice, I think that goes his way. The other thing, and we'll see how this plays out, is once again, you have this very different vision of the current state of the country. In the Republican side, you have America on the brink. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of chaos. On the Democratic side, you have a country that has problems but is still fundamentally optimistic. And it will be really interesting to see which one of those views voters adopt.
Now, speaking of getting that view across then, Mrs. Clinton going to be speaking tonight, officially accepting her party's nomination. What then do you think she has to do in her speech tonight, maybe to convince people who might be on the fence?
Well, this whole week has been about building up Hillary Clinton, right? You had Bill Clinton delivering the personal side of it and their history and their marriage. You had basically every other speaker describing Hillary Clinton as being a hard worker, as doing this nitty-gritty stuff through her whole life. And so what she has to do now is really sell that image and talk about herself in a way that both projects presidential behavior, but also kind of points to that persona, the notion of somebody who is a grinder, basically.
All right. Well, Dr. Swigger, thank you so much, as always, for your insight as we get ready for the final day of the DNC. Make sure you stay with us for continuing coverage of the Democratic National Convention. We'll have a recap. Jen's big speech tomorrow. See, it's 8:16 now on your Thursday morning, and after the break, meteorologist Marshall McPeak tracking some rain in your forecast, some of it happening right now. His update